An army without mercy becomes something else. November 1944, near Aachen, Germany. Lieutenant James Walker counted blankets beside the surgical tent. Rain hit the canvas roof all morning. The mud reached the Jeep tires. 3 ambulances arrived before sunrise. The civilian cot section was empty. It had been empty for 2 days. No German civilians had been admitted since Thursday, but 1 blanket was missing. A blood-stained American medical blanket lay beside cot 14. A German child was under it. The child could not have been older than 8. 2 nurses stood near the supply table. Nobody touched the stretcher. Nobody moved for almost a minute. Walker looked at the blanket inventory sheet again. Then he folded it once and put it inside his coat. This is what Patton did. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the stories about World War II that expose the decisions soldiers carried long after the shooting stopped. James Walker, Cleveland, age 31. He'd been supervising evacuation hospital intake for 14 months. He'd seen mortar wounds, frozen limbs, and men burned inside Sherman tanks. But he'd never seen American nurses refuse treatment to a wounded child. The hospital sat 11 miles west of Aachen. Canvas tents stretched across a frozen field beside a damaged rail line. By November 18th, 1944, the unit had admitted 847 American casualties in 6 days. Most arrived after dark. Walker spent each morning counting plasma bottles and wool blankets. The numbers kept dropping. The artillery fighting east of Aachen had not slowed for 3 weeks. 1 supply truck failed to arrive on November 16th. Another disappeared near Düren after German shelling damaged the road. The hospital had 42 usable blankets left by Friday morning. There were already 96 wounded American infantrymen inside the surgical tents. 17 needed amputations before nightfall. 3 surgeons had worked 19 straight hours. The nurses knew the numbers too. The German child arrived near dawn in the back of a civilian wagon. The driver left before sunrise. Nobody wrote down the child's name. The boy had shrapnel wounds across his left shoulder. His right hand stayed wrapped inside part of a burned coat sleeve. 1 American blanket had already been placed around him before Walker entered the tent. A nurse removed it. She folded the blanket once, set it back on the supply crate, then walked toward the American casualty line without speaking. Walker followed her outside. "You left him untreated," he said. "We have 96 Americans inside." The nurse answered. "We lose supplies now. Someone dies tonight." Walker looked back at the surgical tent. Steam drifted through the canvas opening. The nurse pointed towards the ambulance line. "2 more trucks are coming before noon," she said. "You know that." Walker said nothing for several seconds. Then he opened the intake ledger again. Army regulations allowed emergency aid to civilians, but supplies assigned to frontline evacuation hospitals belonged first to combat casualties. Nobody at the hospital agreed where that line actually ended. By noon, 4 medics were arguing near the storage tent. 2 nurses stopped speaking to each other entirely. 1 corporal refused to sign the civilian intake sheet. Walker finally called Major Robert Hastings, the hospital executive officer, by 3:40 p.m. Hastings had ordered a written report sent to V Corps Medical Command. Thomas Reed, Philadelphia, age 27. He'd been handling field supply inventories for 9 months. He'd seen broken plasma crates, stolen morphine, and entire kitchens abandoned during retreats. But he'd never seen medical staff refuse a child at the intake tent. Reed checked the inventory tables twice, then a 3rd time. 42 blankets remained that morning. By afternoon, only 31 remained unopened. The next supply convoy was still somewhere west of Liège. Walker met him beside the storage tent. "How long before we're dry?" Walker asked. "By tomorrow night, if the shelling keeps up," Reed answered. Walker looked toward the operating ward. Rainwater dripped from the tent ropes beside them. "The boy needs surgery," Walker said. Reed unfolded the supply sheet. "So do 17 Americans." Neither man moved for several seconds. A medic carrying plasma bottles brushed past them without stopping. Walker finally pointed toward the civilian wagon outside the perimeter. "Then write the denial yourself," he said. Reed stared at the paper in his hands. His thumb stayed pressed against the clipboard edge. "I can't do that," he answered. He walked out, went straight to Major Robert Hastings. Robert Hastings, Chicago, age 39. He'd been managing evacuation hospitals for 3 years. He'd seen dysentery outbreaks, collapsing field stations, and surgeons operating during artillery strikes, but he'd never seen his own staff divided over a single patient. Hastings read Reed's report under a hanging lantern. The light shook every time the wind hit the tent wall. "How many civilians this week?" Hastings asked. 11 turned away, Reed answered. "And the dead woman outside the fence. Buried this morning." Hastings closed the folder slowly. He rubbed mud from the heel of one glove. "If word spreads, this place collapses," he said. Walker stood near the entrance flap. His coat sleeves were still wet from rain. "The boy won't survive the night," Walker answered. Hastings looked toward the operating tents again. "Neither will some of ours." Nobody spoke after that. A generator coughed outside behind the ambulance line. Finally, Hastings reached for the hospital typewriter. He rolled a fresh page into the machine himself. The report listed 96 American wounded, 31 blankets remaining. One German child denied admission pending command clarification. At the bottom, Hastings added a final line. "Civilian treatment may compromise combat readiness within 48 hours. He signed it at 7:12 p.m. Then sent the report through V Corps Medical Command. William Carter, Boston, age 42. He'd been coordinating medical logistics for 18 months. He'd seen trains full of amputees, field hospitals overrun, and medics treating soldiers without anesthesia. But he'd never seen a civilian case threaten an entire command chain. Colonel Carter received Hastings' report shortly after midnight. A second report arrived 14 minutes later from Eschweiler. 6 American wounded dead, 2 surgical tents destroyed, 83 blankets lost in the fire. Carter read both reports without removing his gloves. The room stayed silent except for the radio operator near the doorway. A captain standing beside the map table finally spoke. "If we approve this, every hospital in 9th Army will hear about it." Carter kept reading. "And if we deny it?" another officer asked. Nobody answered immediately. Outside, trucks continued arriving from the front. One ambulance carried 5 wounded infantrymen from the 1st Division alone. Carter folded the reports together carefully. "If this reaches Washington," the captain said, "they'll ask why civilians got supplies during active operations." Carter looked toward the casualty map pinned to the wall. Red markers covered most of the Aachen sector. Then he picked up the field telephone. "Forward both reports to 3rd Army headquarters," he said. The captain turned toward him immediately. "You're putting this on Patton's desk." Carter placed the receiver down. His hand stayed there for several seconds. Yes, by the next morning, it was sitting on Patton's desk. Patton read the hospital report alone before sunrise. His thumb stopped at the final inventory line. 31 blankets remaining. He turned one page back, then another. The room stayed silent for several seconds. An aide near the doorway did not speak. Patton set the report flat against the desk. One corner of the paper stayed folded upward. A frontline hospital turned away a wounded child because they're running out of blankets, he said. Nobody answered immediately. Patton stood up. He reached for his gloves first. Get my driver. I'm going myself. The aide stepped closer to the desk. Sir, Ninth Army already warned civilian admissions could spread through the sector, he said. If supplies disappear, they'll blame this headquarters. Patton buttoned his coat slowly. Then they can blame me. Jeep. Combat uniform. 4 stars on the helmet. Ivory-handled revolvers on the belt. The convoy left headquarters at 6:40 a.m. Rain still covered the road west of Aachen. 2 military police motorcycles rode ahead of the jeep. Neither siren was turned on. Patton did not speak during the drive. He read the supply report again once before folding it into his coat pocket. The evacuation hospital came into view shortly after 8:00 a.m. 3 ambulances already waited outside the intake tents. A medic near the gate stopped moving when the jeep approached. Patton stepped onto the mud beside the ambulance line. No announcement had been sent ahead. Patton walked past the ambulance line without stopping. Mud covered the lower half of his boots. Jeep. Combat uniform. 4 stars on the helmet. Ivory-handled revolvers on the belt. The intake tent went silent before he entered. 2 surgeons near the operating partition stepped aside immediately. Lieutenant Walker stood beside cot 14. The German child remained under the same stained blanket from the night before. Patton looked at the blanket first, then the inventory clipboard beside the cot. Nobody spoke. One nurse near the supply crates folded her hands behind her back. Another medic lowered his eyes towards the floorboards. Patton picked up the inventory sheet himself. "Who removed the blanket?" he asked. The nurse stepped forward after several seconds. "I did." "Sir." Patton looked at her for a moment, then back at the supply numbers. "How many left?" 31 this morning," she answered. Patton nodded once. He folded the sheet in half. No one in the tent moved. Outside, another ambulance engine shut down beside the surgical ward. Rain struck the canvas roof above them. Patton turned toward Walker. "How many empty cots outside the perimeter?" 12 supply cots in storage. "Sir." Patton looked toward the rear medical tents. "Set them up." Nobody answered immediately. "Outside the main ward," he said. "Separate civilian section." Walker stared at him for 1 second. Then he turned toward the doorway. "Move the storage crates." Walker shouted toward the medics outside. Patton stepped beside the child's stretcher. He pulled the stained blanket higher across the boy's chest himself. The nurse who removed the blanket remained beside the supply table. She did not step backward. She did not speak again. Patton looked at her once more. "You protect the wounded you have," he said. "Now protect this one too." Then he walked out of the tent. Within 40 minutes, 12 civilian cots stood beneath a second canvas shelter behind the ambulance line. By noon, 4 medics had been reassigned from transport duty to the civilian ward. The child entered surgery at 12:47 p.m. 2 fragments of shrapnel were removed from his shoulder before sunset. 37 American wounded still received treatment that afternoon. No surgeries were cancelled. No American patient lost a blanket assignment during the next 24 hours. 3 civilian children arrived by evening. All 3 were admitted. The nurse who removed the blanket stayed on duty through the night shift. No disciplinary report was filed against her. At 8:10 p.m., Patton's jeep passed the hospital gate again without stopping. Mud still covered the tires. The civilian tent stayed open for 11 days after Patton's visit. 26 German civilians received emergency treatment there before the hospital relocated eastward. 14 were children under the age of 12. Supply shortages did not disappear. By late November, the hospital still reported blanket rationing across 3 surgical wards, but no further civilian refusals appeared in the intake records. 2 weeks later, 9th Army Medical Command authorized temporary overflow civilian cots at 7 additional evacuation hospitals near Aachen. The order never mentioned Patton by name. Years later, Lieutenant James Walker said, "He never made a speech. He just walked in and changed what everyone thought was allowed." Patton never mentioned the incident publicly. He never talked about it. The nurse had not been wrong. 31 blankets for nearly 100 wounded soldiers was not enough. Any officer responsible for those men understood the fear behind her decision. But the child on cot 14 had also been real. The blood on the blanket had been real. And once the boy entered the tent, someone still had to decide what kind of army stood around him. Patton answered that question with 12 cots behind a canvas wall. Would you have saved the supplies for American soldiers or done what Patton did? Let us know in the comments. If you want more stories about military decisions that divided the men who witnessed them, subscribe. In the weeks after Aachen, American field hospitals across Western Germany continued facing civilian casualties during the Allied advance. Many doctors followed regulations exactly. Others improvised quietly when supply numbers no longer matched the people arriving at the gate. Those choices rarely appeared in official victory reports. But the soldiers and medics who stood inside those tents remembered them for decades. Some remembered the shortages first. Others remembered the child under the blanket. And some remembered the morning Patton arrived, without warning, stepped through the mud, and changed the rules for one hospital without saying another word.